Hello, this is Dr. Shel Watts with MBAadmit.com. We are here today to present a webinar on 7 EMBA success practices, getting into a top program. We are very happy to be here today with the GMAT Club. GMAT, by the way, is going to be giving away some free GMAT tests. All you need to do is like this video, post a comment, and click the link that you see there. So today I'm going to actually walk you through best practices for getting into an EMBA program. The EMBA programs, many of you will have noticed, have blossomed in number in the last 4 to 5 years. Most of the top MBA programs are offering them now, everything from Wharton to MIT to Chicago. So it's a wonderful opportunity for those candidates who have chosen that they don't want to stop their jobs. They'd like to do it during their job. And also they may have waited longer than a typical full-time candidate to decide that the MBA was something that they would like to pursue. So they're slightly older on the whole than a full-time candidate would be. And so this EMBA option is a very viable one. So let's, before I get into that, let me just let you know that there are some freebies for those of you who have joined us today. We have a free EMBA book, which you can get on our website. Just go there to the link that you see, and you can download a free copy that will give you some information about the EMBA offerings process, how to think about rankings of schools, different options for standardized tests, and so forth. We also are happy to do a free profile evaluation for anyone who wants to know what we think about your specific case. We get plenty of people with the EMBA who are EMBA candidates who have a low GPA, who wonder if their title is senior enough, who may feel that their field is a little bit outside the norm for the EMBA candidate profile. And we're happy to give you feedback on what we think your odds are and where you might be a good fit. Now, to give you a little bit more about our company before I go a little bit further, we've been doing this 18 years full time. And so we definitely were around before the first EMBA programs came up. It's been wonderful to watch them grow. Wharton was the first major EMBA program. And for years, it was way out front in terms of quality. Today, that's not so much the case. There are many other schools that rival it, including MIT and Chicago, Kellogg. I mean, just wonderful offerings. We have a lot of candidates with the EMBA every year and a very high success rate. So we really do love working with the EMBA candidates. When you do come to our company, you will be working directly with me, so Dr. Shel. And I have been doing admissions, as I said, 18 years full time for the MBA programs. And you would be working directly with me, so you never have to worry about who you would be actually working with in our company. So another thing for you, feel free to come to our website, sign up for the newsletter. You'll see that if you go click through the blog tab, you'll see the sign up there. And we're happy to give you more information about admissions processes through that channel as well. So let's just talk about EMBA benefits. Many of you may be looking at the EMBA new, don't know very much about it. Others may have been looking at it for a while. But the first major thing that probably drew you to this is that you recognize as you're in your career that you need to tool up to get to the next level of success. So the EMBA is the route to get to an MBA degree. And so you will get, the core curriculum, you'll get specialized electives that allow you to, strengthen your fundamentals in business as well as to specialize in the areas that are relevant for you given your current career. Other people look to the EMBA to augment their brand. And by that, I mean that, they may have had a wonderful degree from Georgetown or Princeton, but now they want to get another institution that will allow them to not only get the schooling, but also the network. And so it's a wonderful way to get Wharton on your resume, or Chicago, UCLA. Again, most of the major schools offer it. For others of you, you may have either gotten your first degree in college from a school that you don't think is very shiny, or maybe you did go to prestigious school, but you didn't have a strong GPA. So you're looking to the EMBA also to redefine yourself. And so really rebrand yourself, as well as to gain a network from an outstanding school. And it is actually a very viable route to do that as well. Another major benefit of the EMBA, which some people are not as aware of, is that once you become an alumni of one of these programs, you're in there where you have access to free webinars, exclusive teachings by professors on a lifelong basis. So you're going to have that continuing education even after the EMBA program is over. So it really is a wonderful thing to consider doing, a lot of benefits for you as a professional. Before we go into the actual best practices, I do want to sort of set the frame and set the context, because there are actually a lot of misconceptions about the EMBA. And so let's just walk through the 5 most widely misunderstood things about the EMBA. First of all, some people are convinced that you have to be a high-level executive. So they think if I'm not 45 and I don't have the title of COO, I'm not attracted to these programs. That is definitely not the case. So we at MBAadmic.com, as I mentioned, we work a lot with EMBA candidates. And our typical EMBA candidate will be between the ages of 28 and 44. So, 28 test does not look young. There are select programs that do prefer older candidates, but most of the top ones are fine with a 28-year-old, fine with 32-year-old. And even the title does not disqualify you, because many times we'll get someone with an engineering background who may have a project manager title, and they're concerned that they won't be attractive to these schools based on that. And really, it's the case that it's more about how you write about your work experience in the application that matters more than the title. So I can imagine many situations where if a project manager had not taken time to really develop outstanding essay content, and also to work with the recommendation writers, that they could be putting forward an application that makes it seem as though they don't have enough in terms of leadership best practices and teamwork best practices. So it's really the experience that you're presenting that's unattractive, as opposed to the actual title or the true experience. And so you need to know how to write about your experience in a way that makes you attractive to the school. In many ways, when you can show the right quality of work, the title that you have is a little bit irrelevant. Another myth is that the degree you're going to get will say EMBA, when actually it's an MBA. You should think of the EMBA as simply the route that you're taking to get to the MBA degree. So the actual degree that you have says MBA. That means that when you write your resume, you're able to write MBA on there. You don't have to write EMBA at any point. And so you will be a business school graduate from Wharton or from MIT. And you will get full access to everything that's there in terms of the alumni and the networking and so forth. Another thing that people think is that if they did very poorly in college, that a low GPA is a deal killer in terms of the top schools. So sometimes I get people coming to us who have a 2.3, a 2.8, a 2.6. I actually even had someone recently with a 1.8, and each of them is convinced that they cannot be viable at the top schools. That is actually not the case. Now, for most people who are applying to the MBAs, the college experience was 10 to 15 years in the past. And so the schools recognize that in many ways that may not be a reflection of your skills and abilities at this point. So most of them will overlook that GPA if you put together a very strong application, which means very strong essays that convey your business understanding and leadership understanding, excellent recommendations, a resume that speaks to the fact that you'll be able to bring a lot of wonderful things into the classroom. So we've been very successful in getting people with 2.3 GPAs into Columbia University, someone with a 1.8 GPA into NYU last year, and so you shouldn't assume, again, that the poor college performance is going to close doors. And even for the very most competitive candidate, so we all know that's probably going to be the Indian foreign national male, especially if it's an engineer. But even for that candidate, when I get candidates who are second class, who were not first class or first class distinction, they are still able to access outstanding schools if the application is timed well and selected well. The same thing goes for the low GMAT score. Now, many people get worried. They go out and they take the GMAT and they find that they just can't get a great score. And that is because usually at the level at which a EMBA candidate is at the time of applying, you have a family, you have a very demanding career. There's just not a whole lot of time to devote to studying for a standardized test. And so therefore, it's not very unusual to see someone, even who had a great undergraduate performance, come out with a 620 GMAT score. So the schools recognize that. So a low GMAT score, at least in the 600s, may not necessarily close the door to even the top schools like Wharton. However, you should be aware of which schools are more sensitive to the GMAT. Many of them don't require it simply because they recognize that you can't study, most people can't study at that level when they're an EMBA candidate. And so the schools have recognized over the last 10 years, since more and more schools have been launching these programs, that the GMAT scores are not correlating with the caliber of the candidate or their ability to do well in the program. So many of them have actually phased out the GMAT. They're not requiring it. And a few of them are actually starting to take something called the executive assessment, which is a much easier test. It's a lot easier to take it without having studied a lot. One of the few schools that's very picky about the GMAT tends to be Wharton. So for those of you who are interested in Wharton, don't take for granted the GMAT score. You don't necessarily have to get a 700. A mid 600 figure is usually okay, but they are more picky than most of the other schools. Now, the last thing, and this is the big issue, is that some people really do want to use the EMBA to change careers. And so they feel like they need an MBA, but the EMBA will not suffice because they want to change careers. That is actually a myth. Most of the top EMBA programs allow you full access to their career services, and that's the main thing. Like, do you have access to that or not? Do you have access to the recruiters, to the databases, to the alumni network while you're a student? And most of them do allow that. There's only a few that don't. Now, for the ones that don't, you need to be aware of that, because if you do go in there and you say, look, I want to change careers, that's why I'm trying to get this degree, they will see a misfit, and so you won't be a strong candidate there. So just be aware of which schools bar that sort of access, but the vast majority allow you to have that access. So that's the sort of the frame. The EMBA is simply a wonderful path to an MBA. Wonderful for someone who's older and just won't have access to a full-time one based on age. Wonderful for people who don't want to stop their jobs. Wonderful for people who didn't have a strong performance undergrad, because it becomes the second chance degree. So let's talk about best practices. How do you try to maximize your odds to get into one of the top schools? Well, the first thing I will say is assess yourself accurately. We actually get a number of candidates approaching us who are convinced that they will not have a chance at a top school because of something like a low GPA. I had someone just last year, she had a 1.8 GPA, and she had done extremely well in a company, a top computing company, over about a 15-year period, maybe had about 5 promotions. And so I really felt that the GPA would not get in her way of a top school. It took a few sessions of talking with her before she finally actually became convinced to go ahead, at least try. And she did get into the school that we had been targeting. So don't assume that the low GPA is defining. I always say, if you find that your GPA was defining in the process of applying to an EMBA, and that GPA was 15 years back, then you didn't do your job in the application, because the application should be redirecting the attention to the successes, to the professional success, to the leadership skills, and redefining you on that basis. Don't assume that a low GMAT score is going to close the door. Don't assume that you're too young or too old. We even had someone as young as 26 get into the program at Columbia. He was a very successful, a reasonably successful entrepreneur. And again, it was just a very strong application that opened that door to him. And then again, don't assume that the nature of your work experience excludes you. So sometimes we get people who are with a family business that feel that, well, why would Wharton be interested in me? Because it's just a family business. They don't know this business. We get people from family businesses into Wharton all the time. When it's a teacher, we recently had a teacher approach us. It's a little bit more challenging to make sure that you are putting the right information into the essays, but it is very possible. If a teacher is going to stress the work that she's done with students one-to-one, that will not make her highly attractive, because it's not necessarily seen as business relevant. However, there are many things that a teacher does that are business relevant. And so the job in the application process is to draw out those things and put that in the essay content as well as in the recommendations. Doctors, there are all sorts of people, all sorts of backgrounds that will feel that, are they appropriate for an MBA program? And again, don't assume that your work experience, the nature of it, excludes you, because the EMBA programs do take a very diverse set of people. So best practice number 2. This is a very big one. Be careful of going through a resume review or an early interview with the EMBA program. So many of the schools, if you shoot an email or you attend a session, a sort of information session, they'll say, oh, well, give us your resume and we'll do a review. The problem with doing that before you've actually discussed it with someone else, like if you're going to use a consultant, is that, let's go back to that project manager. So say the project manager presents a resume that is very technical or isn't really stressing the leadership and teamwork best practices that we know is going to be important for that candidate to get into the schools. They're handing over a resume that will give a poor first impression to the school. So you really should think about getting a good resume edit so that you're putting forward something that's going to get you on a good footing from the beginning. The early interview, the same thing. If you go through the interview early before you're applying, which some of the schools do that, you're already positioning yourself. You're saying what your long-term goal is, what your short-term goal is, and those may not be the right ones for the purposes of getting into the school. So we always prefer to work with someone before they go through that process. There are some instances we've had where someone has gone through the interview, for instance, and positioned themselves poorly, and moving forward with the application, we just sort of have to try to correct that. But it's in your best interest to really try to make sure that if you do the resume review and the early interview, that you've really thought through well what to say, because that is going to be the first impression. Those notes will stay in your file and they will influence outcomes. So just be very careful and prepare well for those things. Practice number 3, best practice number 3. Time your EMBA applications excellently. Now, there are many of the programs that have rolling admissions, and then others of them have rounds. And so if it's rolling, it simply means that as they get applications in, they will be making decisions about whether to accept the candidate or not. So for instance, MIT begins opening their doors at September 30th this year. And so you're able to submit your application on September 30th or on October 3rd. So if you're in that first month, you have all the seats available, you're going to have much better odds of admissions. If you wait until April, when the final deadline might be, they will have filled up 80% of the seats, 85, maybe 90%. So now you're competing for a very small number of seats, and you may get a flood of applicants trying to make that final deadline. So it's more applicants for a small number of seats, which means that you will have diminished odds. So for most candidates, earlier is going to be better than later. There are the overrepresented candidate, it is even more important that you time it well. So for someone who, again, the Indian foreign national male, the East Asian foreign national male, men in general, because women apply in smaller numbers, the sooner that you're applying, the better for you. The same with rounds, round 1 versus 2 and 3. By round 3, for the overrepresented candidate, you may find that you're turned down just on profile. Round 2, it'll be harder for overrepresented candidates than round 1. But round 2, it's still very possible to get into these programs. It's when there's a round 3 that it's much more challenging. But just bear in mind, especially if you do have a weakness, so say you have a weak GPA, it's better to apply early when you've got a lot more seats and therefore better odds of success than to wait toward the end, where they'll be comparing you much more directly to people who have stronger GPAs. So timing is important. Best practice number 4. Recognize that the single most important criteria for success in the EMBA program process, admissions process, is your professional success and leadership as well. So it simply means that if your GPA was lower, you can compensate by showcasing professional success. It also means that, as I said before, if your title doesn't necessarily reflect what you're doing, your essays and your recommendations should, and therefore if you are showing outstanding success and great potential for the future, you should have much better odds of succeeding. So you should be looking at the essays and recommendations as if they are a marketing package. Put it together very, very well with a great deal of care. And then in the process of your essays, your recommendations, your resume, as well as all parts of the application form, you should be communicating the depth of your knowledge, your understanding of best practices, and how you can contribute in the classroom. There's also the interview. You should definitely prepare very well for the interview, because in the EMBA admissions process, you're much more prone to get asked questions about leadership examples, times that you led, times that you might have dealt with tense situations. And you need to be able to, again, to express things in a way that communicates a certain level of competence and ability in terms of leadership and teamwork and client management, things like that. So prepare well to give a great impression. Best practice number 5. Recommendations and the corporate letter are very, very important in the EMBA process. Now, some of you may not know what the corporate letter is, so let me just take a second to explain that. The corporate letter, most of the top schools ask that you get a letter from your corporation to basically say that they are okay with the fact that you might be spending a Friday away from the workplace to attend the school, or maybe there might be 2 weekends of a month that you'll be in school, but they just want to make sure that the company is okay with the fact that you're going to have this other thing that's taking time from your overall schedule. It may not be your work schedule, but overall there is going to be this extra thing that's taking your attention. And so the letter at minimum needs to say that the company is fine about the fact that you'll be devoting time to this. And then in some cases, a very, very small number of cases, they actually want your company to also sponsor you financially in part. There are only a couple that ask that, so you don't have to worry about that if you don't have the corporate financial sponsorship. But it's important that the company sounds excited about you, that they sound as though they feel that you have very great skills, that it's very worthwhile to invest in you. If that tone is lacking in the letter, that could be problematic for some of the very top schools like Wharton. So you need to make sure to handle that with care. And the same thing with the recommendations. The schools want to know that the company sees you as someone who has the potential to go higher in, if not the company, the industry. And so you need to get recommendations that paint you in a very, very good light. So don't underestimate those 2 parts of the process. Best practice number 6. Use your application content skillfully. And I'm going to talk about this in 2 ways. So we've already talked a bit about the person that has the low GPA and how you can use the essay content, especially when they have those leadership essay questions, to really showcase your professional success, your skills, how well you're able to lead. And those things are going to minimize the importance of the GPA. So that's using the content strategically, because you know that you need to redirect the attention away from a weak spot. For the person that has the low GMAT score, it's sort of the same thing, where in most cases, that low GMAT score by itself will not close the door for you, but you need to show evidence that you're going to be able to handle the curriculum. And so there's many other ways to do that. Some people can point back to their college performance. Some people can point to the nature of their work and the quantitative work that they're doing. But you need to skillfully showcase it. In some cases, you will actually mention it directly, but you certainly need to do it also indirectly in the content that you're putting forward in the essays and the recommendations. When I say use the content of the application skillfully, that also means the resume. So there are going to be some candidates who have 2 one-year jobs and maybe the most recent, a 4-year job. So the most recent one lasted. The first couple were 1-year stints. For many of the MBA programs, having short-term jobs is a flag, and so they will see that negatively. And so there's ways to use your resume so you're de-emphasizing that. So again, look at yourself, your qualifications, strengths and weaknesses, and whatever weaknesses there are, you should be using the content of the application to redirect attention away. The same thing with someone coming from a small shop company. So a no-name company in an industry or a family business they've never heard of. The small shop company is seen more as a negative than the family business. Family business, I don't think, is really seen as a negative as long as it's a reasonably, medium-sized company. But a small shop company, so I mean a really small player in an industry that the school will never have heard of the name of that company, that can be a negative if you don't handle the content well. And so it's very, very important that you are communicating the value of your experience there, as well as connecting that experience to a long-term vision, a very strong vision of where you're going in the future. So those are the main things that I would be saying in terms of using content skillfully. There's actually another dimension that's coming up more recently because these programs are getting more and more popular. And that is that for people coming out of the larger shops, so Morgan Stanley, Samsung, IBM, the schools love to see candidates from those type of companies, the big fortune companies. However, because these programs are getting more and more popular, you will find that many of your peers from the same companies are applying to these schools. So you're going to have the job of trying to convince the school to choose you from that pool, from your company. And so it is important that you pay very good attention also to the content that you're putting forward. So even though you're from a fortune company, you should not take for granted that, it's an easy in, because you will have competition from others who are at your company. Best practice number 7, use your long-term goal to distinguish yourself. So present a very strong vision of where you intend to go in the long term. So not, you certainly should in the application be talking about what am I going to be doing when I'm in the program? How am I going to put this to use? Where do I want to be 3 years out? But you should also be saying, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, this is where I really want to be, and give a good vision for that. The more attractive that vision is, the more attractive you are as a candidate. You need to look at it from the viewpoint of the schools. So in parenthesis, the selfish interest of the school is that they want the mover and the shaker. So if someone says, I just want to run a mom and pop school and a mom and pop business, and I'm going to go to your school to get training, they will think, well, you don't need a top MBA to run a mom and pop business. And so that's not going to be very attractive to them. If you sound more like you're going to be a mover and shaker in your industry, and that you're really wanting to do great things in the industry, you're going to be a more attractive candidate. So do pay attention to how you're presenting your long-term goal. When you present a very strong vision of your future, you pull yourself out of the pack. So again, for those folks coming from the fortune companies where there's a lot of competition, it is something that's going to position you better for admissions. And again, the long-term vision can deflect away from weaknesses. So whether that's a GPA, whether that's the nature of your work experience, putting it to a very attractive long-term goal, connecting it to that, can make those dimensions of your application and your candidacy less important. So don't underemphasize and don't underestimate the importance of the long-term goal. So those are the 7 best practices we wanted to go over today. You are more than welcome to contact us. Like I said, we love working with EMBA candidates. We work with quite a number every year. And so here's our contact information. You're more than welcome to send us an email, send us your resume if you'd like a free evaluation, sign up for the newsletter, download the free ebook. We offer all those resources to you. And, for us, it's very exciting to work with EMBA candidates because we get people who really may have been the first person to go to college in their family and had a low GPA and just have blossomed since college, who just really want that second chance and shot at a top university. We get people from family businesses who don't even have a resume because they've never needed a resume, where we have to work with them and help them learn how to put that together, how to talk about their experience to the committees and get in the door. But it's wonderful to really be able to empower people to open this door, because the EMBA is really a great option these days. So Q&A, you're more than welcome to send us questions if you like, and perhaps we can work with GMAT Club to post some of the responses to Q&A. But for those of you who do have more questions, feel free to be in touch. The admission season is beginning now, so you might want to make sure to check the deadlines. MIT is just beginning to open the doors. Many other programs are starting to open as well. And so if you're ready to go and you think that it's good for you, as we said, earlier is better than later. And feel free to be in touch if you have any need for assistance. Just to remind you again, the GMAT Club is going to be giving away free GMAT tests. So all you need to do is like this video, post a comment, and click the link that you see. Thank you so much for joining us today, and good luck in your EMBA admissions process.